G'day divers and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking all about GoPro settings when using the AOI-03 wide-angled lens. Hi, I'm Sean Elliott and I've been doing underwater videography for about 25 years. These days I love to specialise in getting the best images I can out of action cameras and mobile phones. There's nothing better than using economical cameras to grab great shots underwater and show people that you don't need a ton of money to get into underwater videography. I do everything from shore diving right through to technical diving, rebreather diving and cave diving. The one thing that I've always got is a camera in my hands. If you want to find out how to take amazing shots with simple cameras like the GoPro or even your mobile phone, then please like and subscribe to my channel. So let me go through the differences of the cameras from an underwater point of view. There hasn't been a massive change from the Hero 6 all the way through to the Hero 13, and if you don't have the money to upgrade, then don't worry about it. You can still get great images from even a Hero 6. Some of my most popular videos and some of my best footage on this channel is from just a Hero 6, and I have successfully sold footage for thousands of dollars over in Europe and in Australia straight from a GoPro Hero 6. As for the main differences and why I'd upgrade, the big difference was if you've got a Hero 6 through to the Hero 9, you're going to have to use 4K 60. Now the only other reason to really upgrade from the Hero 6 to the Hero 10 is from the Hero 11 on, you can get GoPro Labs and get auto white balance lock. And that is probably one of the biggest things that makes getting shots easier. By putting GoPro Labs on, which is a GoPro Labs firmware, you can then add extra features to your GoPro. And the one that I really like and really recommend is auto white balance lock. And what it means is your GoPro will continue to auto white balance until you press record, and whatever white balance it has at that point, it will lock the white balance. Now that gives you two features. One, with all action cameras and mobile phones, if you don't lock the white balance, and even on expensive cameras, what's going to happen a lot of the time, especially if you're taking a shot out in the blue, is you're going to get that color change. The camera is going to continue to auto white balance, it's going to change its mind, and it's going to change the tint and the temperature as you take a shot. And you're going to lose a lot of shots because of it. With the auto white balance lock that's in GoPro Labs from the Hero 11 onwards, I can lock that white balance and it will stay the same color temperature and the same tint throughout the shot. The other thing you can do is almost like a manual white balance. Because I know that's going to happen, I can point at something like the sand, make sure the white balance is exactly what I want, lock the white balance, and then lift the camera and get the perfect white balance. It's just a real shame that I can't get a white balance lock that stays until I decide that it's finished, because then I could just lock it for a certain depth and keep it that way. So if GoPro, you're listening, please give me a permanent lock. That would be a game changer, and I'll buy a new camera just for that. Apart from that, the Hero 11 to 13, from an underwater point of view, same hardware. There is things in GoPro Labs I would like to try. The stabilization has an underwater function. And there is a new white balance function. The thing is, for me to spend all that money just to get a new firmware that could come on this camera is a bit of an insult. And number two, I'm not sure I'd use them anyway. If you're good at your buoyancy, you really shouldn't need to be using too much stabilization. The key is not to use stabilization. The more you use it, the less field of view you're going to get. And from the white balance point of view, I'd rather get the white balance right myself using lights and filters than start adding in strange changes in the white balancing algorithm that's in the camera. It's never as good. If I keep it as standard white balance, I know where I'm at, and then I can get the white balance right when I take the shot. But I would like to try them out, so we'll see in the future whether I bother upgrading to the Hero 13. I'm certainly excited to see in September, October of this year what the Hero 14 might bring. Apart from that, there really wasn't any changes, and even the increase in the battery length is not enough to get me to jump ship, because I really needed probably a 200 to 250% increase in battery life to make it worthwhile. There is no point. I can get through one dive. Unless I can clearly get through two dives, what's the point? That's the only reason I haven't upgraded to the Hero 13, and I use GoPros purely for underwater videography. All those other features like removable lenses, etc., are of little use to me. If they're of use to you, well, that's a totally different thing. So let's get into the settings. So we're going to go through the main settings on the GoPro Hero 11. The same principles will work from the Hero 6 all the way to the Hero 13. So if you're not sure, if you've got a question, please drop it in the comments and I'll explain the difference in the menu. If you swipe down from the top, first screen here, we've got a few settings we'd like to change. There is absolutely no point in having the voice control on because we're going to be underwater, so tap that and switch it off. There's also no need to have any beeps because we're underwater. It's only going to annoy you and waste battery. We do want quick capture on in case the screen goes off and we want to get a shot really quickly. We can press the button and it will start recording. Up to you whether you want anything on the front screen, but with the wide-angled lens on, you're not going to be able to see it, so I normally switch it off just to save some battery. Orientation, I like to lock it because that way you don't end up with it swinging around to 9:16 on you. We don't need to worry about the lens mod, and we don't need to worry about locking the screen because we're going to be using it in an underwater housing. Next, we're going to swipe left, and we're going to end up in the next preferences section. We want our video mode to be on highest, and we want our controls to be pro because we want to capture the best image we can. Then we want to go into preferences. Once we're in preferences, the wireless connection, that's not going to work underwater, so you might as well switch it off and hope that it saves you some battery. Go back in, go into general. The beep volume is not going to matter because we've switched the beeps off. Quick capture we already switched on. The default preset is up to you. I change between video and last used depending on whether I'm going to be taking photos and video or just video, so I'll leave it on last used at the moment. The auto power off, I leave about 5 minutes. I find that's a good amount of time for battery saving. LEDs, you want them all off. There's no point in having LEDs on. It's only going to use battery. Plus, I do find that if you have some LEDs on and you get into low light situations, you may end up seeing that red flashing in your shot or behind your lens. Now, anti-flicker, that's up to you. That depends on where you live. Now, I'm in Australia. I really should have that at 50 Hertz. If there's any flickering on the GoPro, that's because I am under artificial lights. And in Australia, to get rid of that flicker, I need to be on 50 Hertz. The problem with 50 Hertz is I then only get 25 frames per second and 50 frames per second, and I want 30 and 60 for YouTube, and it doesn't affect me underwater with LED lights as to whether or not I'm on 50 or 60. It only affects my frame rate. So I leave it on 60 so I can get 30 and 60 frames per second, but I do apologize if any of this is flickering on the screen at the moment because I am above water and I am under artificial lights. So we scroll down and we get GPS. No point in having GPS. Might as well leave it off. It's only going to use battery and it's not going to work underwater. Voice control we already switched off. Displays we already switched off. Language, all those things up to you. Now what I would say is before each day I like to have downloaded all my footage, and as long as I know it's all off, I will format the SD card. If you format the SD card before the day, you've got far less chance of corrupted files or running out of space, because you can't delete pictures underwater, and it's much less likely that your GoPro will crash. So try and have a nice clean formatted SD card before you start your dives or to start your diving day. Now that is all the general settings applicable to your GoPro. We're now going to go into the settings that are applicable just for taking shots with the AOI-03 wide-angled lens. So now let's go into the settings for the actual wide-angled lens. Now there's only two setups I'll use. I'll use one in wide and one in linear, but all the other settings will be the same. So if we jump on to our settings for this dive, we'll just edit the first one that's called standard. Jump into resolution and frame rate. Now you really need to shoot in 16:9. If you use 4:3 or 8:7, you are going to see the hood in the image. You can crop if you like, but you're going to lose some resolution. The other thing is I always shoot in 60 frames per second, so I want to use 16:9 because 8:7, even on the Hero 13, still is only 30 frames per second. So like I said, I want 60 frames per second. The only time I would use 30 frames per second is when I'm shooting really low light stuff. Say I'm on a wreck quite deep and I'm getting very wide angled shots and there's just not enough light and I'm not close to something to be able to light it up with the lights. Then you're going to need to probably drop back to 30 frames per second or maybe even 24 frames per second just to get as much light as you possibly can in that shot. But all the rest of the time I want 60 frames per second to give me the option to half speed the footage in post, because nearly always underwater footage will look better at half speed. Then we've got the lens. The lens obviously is designed for a wide angle, so we want the wide angled lens. The GoPro works the best there. That's what the camera was designed for and what the wide angled lens was designed for. There is no point in using super view or hyper view. It is a distorted image no matter what. It's not a real image, it's digitally made up, and you're going to see the hood. So leave it in wide for a wide angled shot for the best results. I would set up another one in linear just so you can get a closer shot. Hyper smooth, I just have it on. I don't put it any higher. Reason being is you should be able to dive in such a way that you can get your shot smooth enough anyway. It's going to show up less in a wide angled shot as well. And if you put the stabilization any higher, you're going to start cutting into field of view. So a little bit of stabilization is good. And sometimes I'll even switch it completely off. If I've set up my camera to be completely neutral in the water, I will switch stabilization off completely to get as wide a shot as I can. Scheduled capture, duration, hindsight, timer, and zoom are all not relevant. So let's talk about ProTune. We want 10-bit on, we want bitrate high, and we want the shutter on auto. We want the best footage we can get, and we can't change the shutter easily underwater. I've had EV compensation at minus 0.5 for every GoPro because it always overcompensates and you don't want to blow your highlights. Now, white balance and color and sharpness. Now, it's one thing to talk about doing color correction in post for above water. The GoPro is an action camera. It is a tiny sensor, it's a tiny camera. It does not have raw capability and it doesn't have the information to be doing massive amounts of color correction in post for underwater footage. So leave your white balance on auto, leave your sharpness at medium, and leave your color on natural. If you try and use flat and try and get that raw looking sort of image, you just will not have the information to pull it back. What you need to do is try and get your white balance right when you take the shot. I will do no color correction in post. I just don't find that there is any real ability to fix any of the GoPro footage. It's just does not have the data. So if I get the shot right, it's in. If I don't get the shot right, I delete it. Next is ISO. Again, the same thing here. We want it 100 minimum, maximum 400. The only time I'll let it go to 800 is when I drop the shutter speed first to 30 or 24 and I'm in a very low light situation, again like a wreck or a cave. The reason being, again, 1600 is horrible. This is a small action camera with a very small sensor. It does not work well in low light, so you can't use it in low light. If you want good footage, you need to take shots that you can take and not worry about the shots that you can't take. Already mentioned that you want sharpness on medium, color on natural, and none of the audio matters, and the shortcuts you're not going to be able to touch, so that doesn't matter. Now, the only other one that I would set up would be exactly the same, but change to a linear shot, maybe even zoomed in at 1.4 times, just so you have a completely different field of view. You may also want to have one set up as 4K 120, so you've got an option of slowing things down a lot. I don't normally worry about 1080 240 because I'm not a big fan of HD anymore. We're now in the day of 4K, and I also find that 240 becomes, because it's such a high frame rate, it is nearly always highly grainy and a high ISO underwater, so it's nearly unusable. So like I said, I'd have one at 5.3K 60 in wide, one at 5.3K 60 in linear zoomed in, and one at 4K 120. All with the other settings the same. Now, I hope that's answered all your questions about the settings I use when I use a wide-angled lens with the GoPro. If you've got any questions, please ask. I will answer them in the comments. And until then, keep blowing bubbles, and don't forget, the deeper you go, the further you get away from all those idiots.